March 10th means we spring ahead to another extra hour of sunlight during the day, as well as free agency kicking off for the NFL. And this is going to be the first of a few series of the free agency fits per position. And first, let's start off with the quarterbacks. And we'll start off with the biggest name, probably name-wise, not best player, but name-wise, in Russell Wilson. The Morocco's released him, said he can or will release him when the new year starts, so that he can go and look for other teams and seek for another fit, another home. And he's met with the Giants and the Steelers so far. And I think those are probably his two best bets right now, but I'll rank them the top three fits for him. We'll go into each of them. First, I have the Giants one, Steelers two, and then the Vikings third. I'll start off with the Giants first. It's New York City. It's Russell Wilson. I think that's a great match. I also do think if the Giants don't draft a quarterback, their best bet is going to go get Russell Wilson. I think he is still a fringe starter in the league. It's crazy to even say that right now, but yes, he is still a fringe starter in the league, I feel like. And Brian Dable, he's an offensive coach, he's an offensive guru. They have a few weapons there as well. I know they're going to probably lose Saquon Barkley. They'll probably draft some few weapons if they don't get a quarterback. Maybe a Malik Neighbors, maybe a Roma Dunze, wide receivers. Maybe they'll go get a few running backs as well. So I think that the Giants will have to go upgrade some skill positions if they don't draft a quarterback early in the draft. Um, because there's a ton of great wide receivers early on in this draft. So it's New York City. I think Russell Wilson can manage it. I know he didn't do a great job in Denver or those last few years in Seattle managing the city and the organization, but I feel like he's learned from both of these, stops in Seattle and Denver that I think New York he'll stay in line and he'll do his job. And he knows this is probably his last opportunity to be a starter wherever team he goes to. And I think the Giants over the Steelers. I know the Steelers have more skill positions and skill weapons, but it's based on the coaching here. And I think Brian Dable is a possible top five offensive play caller and coach in this league. I mean, he turned Daniel Jones into a $40 million quarterback, even though he doesn't deserve the $40 million. And he brought him to the playoffs and they won a playoff game in Minnesota. So this team 2 years ago was in the playoffs and they could have maybe done some actual damage if they had an actual quarterback instead of having Daniel Jones. So I think Russell Wilson will also take a pay cut here too. He's made a ton of money in Seattle. He's made a ton of money in Denver. I don't think he's looking for money. He said in a podcast to Brandon Marshall that he wants to get two more rings in 5 years. Um, NFC is a lot easier than the AFC as well. It's another reason why I picked him over the Steelers. And I do think that Commanders are kind of in a weird spot. The Philadelphia Eagles are in a weird spot. Who knows what happens with the Cowboys in 2 to 3 years? We have to pay CD, Dak probably too, Micah Parsons. They'll start losing some guys. So I do think the Giants are a viable option for Russell Wilson. I know it was kind of a surprise stop. He went there before Pittsburgh. So I think he's also more inclined to live in New York rather than Pittsburgh. And moving over to the Steelers as well. They have a couple running backs. They got Warren, Najee Harris. You don't really love them. You don't really like them. They have some wide receivers though, in George Pickens, who will probably be the number one wide receiver this year for the Steelers. They are thinking about trading Deontay Johnson, which I don't really understand why you would do that necessarily. I think they need Deontay Johnson, and I think he's a good, solid player for them. Their defense is excellent, and obviously the strong front of their team. So Russell Wilson wouldn't have to carry the load, like he might have to with the Giants, depending on their defensive situations this year. And another reason why I possibly would rather go to the Giants than the Steelers is Arthur Smith is the offensive coordinator now for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Mike Tomlin is the head coach. Arthur Smith, terrible offensively with the Falcons when you had Drake London, Kyle Pitts, you had Desmond Ritter. I know Desmond Ritter's not great, but you had guys on the team. You drafted Bijan Robinson here. I mean, they drafted offensive skill players and they just couldn't score touchdowns. So um now he'll have a better quarterback with Russell Wilson, but I just don't trust Arthur Smith offensively and his schemes and play calling at all. So, and Mike Tomlin's not an offensive coach either. So it's really just gonna be Arthur Smith's offense and how they want to run it. Moving on to the last fit, I think the Vikings would be a fit. I think this is Kirk Cousins' spot, but to stay. But if Kirk Cousins does leave, there's Justin Jefferson there, Jordan Addison, Kevin O'Connell, offensive coach. They'll probably draft a running back too as well. So they have some offensive firepower, and Justin Jefferson loves the deep ball. Russell Wilson in Seattle was a great deep ball thrower. Kevin O'Connell loves to spread the ball out, loves to throw it deep. I think if Kirk Cousins doesn't go here, which I think he will, but if he doesn't go here, I think the Vikings would actually be a better spot than Steelers as well. Um, NFC North is getting a little bit tougher with the Lions and Packers now. Who knows what the Bears do? I think they'll draft Caleb Williams, but who knows what the Bears do? But again, it's the NFC. It's a lot easier to get into the playoffs than it is in the AFC, especially if you go to the Steelers. You got Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, that defense with the Browns, those offensive skill weapons. They just traded for Jerry Jeudy. So that's just in the division alone. That's not even talking about Mahomes, Herbert, and Allen, and all those guys. So I would pick the Vikings over the Steelers, but I have them third just because I do think Kirk Cousins is going to go there, and I do think it's just going to come down to the Giants and the Steelers. But speaking of Kirk Cousins, let me move into his possible best fits for free agency. Number one, I have the Vikings, as I said a little bit earlier. Number two, I have the Steelers. Number three, I have the Falcons. And I think he'll end up with the Vikings. I just had to put two more teams down, so I put the Steelers and Falcons, but I do ultimately end up think the Vikings will re-sign him. He has given his heart and soul to Minnesota. They won consistently, won games, made the playoffs. I know they haven't really won in those big spots, made to a championship game in the NFC or even the Super Bowl. But I do think he's given his heart and soul to Minnesota, and I do think Minnesota, having him go down, realized how much they really needed Kirk Cousins and how much of a great football player and coach or quarterback that Kirk Cousins is. And I think Justin Jefferson likes him. I don't think he loves him, but I think he likes him for right now. And Kirk Cousins will probably be looking for his last contract, last big contract I think he can do, maybe 3 to 4 years. That's a little iffy if I am the Vikings. I do think maybe a 1 to 2 year deal is what I would prefer, and Kirk Cousins probably doesn't want to do that. So that's going to create some friction with the team. I do think, though, even if they do re-sign Kirk Cousins, that the team should try to draft a quarterback like a JJ McCarthy or a Michael Penix to give them a year to sit behind Kirk Cousins before they switch to that to JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix or whatnot, because eventually they'll have to pay Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison, they'll probably have to pay. Some defensive guys, maybe they'll start drafting and have to start paying. So I do think, like, as it pertains to right now, the Vikings and Kirk Cousins are a perfect match, but in a year to two now, I don't think they will be. I don't think Kirk Cousins will be what he is a year from or two a year or two from now. And I think they will have to move on, especially to pay some other people, because Kirk Cousins is probably gonna be asking for 45, 50 million. And at his age, with his injury histories, he just tore his Achilles, he's coming back off an Achilles. So it's a little questionable, but I think in the win now situation that the Vikings are in to possibly capitalize and be successful, I think they're in a win now mode and they should just bite the bullet and pay him 3 years and maybe the last year. Um, they're paying him, 55 million. They don't really like it. So, but that's when they have the quarterback that they draft with JJ McCarthy or Michael Penix to replace him and possibly be ready to go start, like Jordan Love sat behind Aaron Rodgers for those few years. So, moving over to the Steelers, I think the Steelers are a better fit from the Falcons standpoint, just because I think the Falcons scheme wise, I think they could go find a better option for them and possibly draft a quarterback or go find a Justin Fields or Baker Mayfield, someone with a little bit more mobility and can move a little bit better. I think the Falcons are going to be a little bit more of a high tempo, fast paced offense. Um, and I do think that the Falcons are an option, but I just don't see Kirk Cousins fitting in Atlanta. I think they Justin Fields fits better with them. A Baker Mayfield fits better. A quarterback that they draft fits better. So that's why I have the Falcons third. The Steelers I have second. Um, I think they scheme wise they fit a little bit better with Arthur Smith than Kirk Cousins. Arthur Smith had Ryan Tannehill when he was in Tennessee before he became the Falcons head coach. He likes a little bit more of a stationary quarterback, a quarterback that can drop back and make some throws. So that's why the Steelers second and the Falcons third. Moving over to Baker Mayfield, who I have also staying in Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay is 100% going to pay him a 3-year deal, maybe $80 million. I don't know how much it'll be guaranteed, but along those lines. I have the Falcons second. Again, high tempo offense, a little bit more air raid, a little bit more loose, and Vikings third. Um, just because Baker Mayfield went to the Rams with McVay and Kyle or Kevin O'Connell, Sean McVay kind of run the same type of offense. So I think that would be a good fit for Baker Mayfield, but I think he will stay with the Bucks. They just re-signed Mike Evans to a long-term extension, so Mike Evans will probably retire as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer. And I don't think Mike Evans would have re-signed that long of a contract if he didn't think that Tampa Bay was going to re-sign Baker Mayfield. I think Baker and Mike really grew together and grew a connection in Tampa Bay. I think they both like each other and they both want to play with each other as well. Both those guys, Baker played at Texas Tech. Mike Evans played at Texas A&M. So, they have a little bit of Texas history, a little bit of Big 12 history together. So I do think that Mike Evans signed that extension thinking that Baker Mayfield was going to be in the Buccaneers team next year. Moving over to Ryan Tannehill, who is kind of getting a little bit under the radar, which makes a little bit of sense. He kind of got benched in Tennessee. His time there was over. I think his best fit, if he wants to be a starter, I think Ryan Tannehill's best bet is with the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel comes from New England. He has that New England culture, that New England mindset. I think Vrabel liked Tannehill until things just fell apart for him. They didn't really have any offensive players, and they tried drafting quarterbacks here and there with Malik Willis, and it wasn't working out. Then they have Will Levis there in Tennessee. He'll probably be the starter there next year as well. And I do believe that if he wants to be a starter still, I think the Patriots are the best option. Patriots today traded Mac Jones to the Jacksonville Jaguars, so they'll either draft a quarterback, which I think they'll draft a quarterback regardless if Tannehill's on the team or not. But again, if they draft a McCarthy, a Penix, one of those guys, or maybe even a Drake May, and maybe they aren't even ready yet, or Jaden Daniels, maybe they aren't ready yet. Maybe they have Tannehill start our first few games. You know, he knows a little bit of New England culture. I know Bill Belichick's not there anymore, but the culture is still the culture, with Gerard Mayo as the head coach now. So I do believe that if Tannehill wants to be a starter, I think the Patriots would be a viable option for him. I have the Steelers second. I think the Steelers would view Ryan Tannehill as the same way as the Patriots are if they draft a quarterback. Um, or it doesn't work out necessarily with Russell Wilson or getting a Kirk Cousins, or Justin Fields for that matter as well. Then they bring in Tannehill, start a few games if they draft a quarterback, and then hand the reins over to that rookie quarterback. Vikings, uh, Brian Tannehill is a little bit lesser version of a Kirk Cousins, but I feel like they play the same type of play style, excuse me. They both are kind of more pocket passers, not necessarily as mobile, can make some throws, can move the ball down the field. So I think Tannehill would be a third option for the Vikings if they don't get Kirk Cousins or some other guys. And lastly, Gardner Minshew Mania, who played exceptionally well with the Colts and Shane Steichen's first year with the Colts as the head coach. I think the Colts will be actually his best bet to stay. I think Shane Steichen really likes him, really trusts him. I think Gardner Minshew fits really well into that system and what they want to do. Pittman, they franchise tagged him, but they'll probably sign him and re-extend him. Jonathan Taylor, the run game, he's still there. Colts offensive line is still very, very decent. I think the Colts are going to make a huge jump this offseason and this year, for the NFL. So I think Anthony Richardson, he's battled some injuries in his first year, so he's got to learn to manage himself and play a little bit healthier. So if he goes down, Gardner should be back into that starting spot with the Colts and be a great fit and great option for him. The second team, which is a surprise team, but a team that desperately would need Gardner Minshew, and that's the New York Jets. with Aaron Rodgers probably playing 1 to 2 more years. He's just coming off an Achilles. We don't know how he's going to be off the Achilles. They need a backup quarterback because we know Zach Wilson is not a backup quarterback. And they had no other option. Tim Boyle wasn't the option either. They had no choice but to start Zach Wilson. That's how bad it is for New York when it pertains to quarterbacks without Aaron Rodgers. So if Aaron Rodgers goes down, or he leaves in a year or two or retires unexpectedly, Gardner Minshew, I think, would be a great backup quarterback. He is a legit backup quarterback. He can win you some games, and he did it with the Colts. He did it with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He is a legit backup quarterback that can win you some games, that could, if you're still a playoff team, which the Jets are with Aaron Rodgers or a viable quarterback, they could still get into the playoffs. And Aaron Rodgers got hurt during the middle of the season and then could come back in the playoffs because Gardner Minshew could get him to the playoffs and get him with the wild card. So I think the Jets would be a very under the radar move for Gardner Minshew, but I think it'd be a legit good option for him as well. They have Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, which is a beast. They have guys there. And the offensive line is a little bit shaky, but they'll definitely fix that, especially with Aaron Rodgers. So he'll also be able to learn from Aaron Rodgers if he, retires in a year or two. So he'll be able to learn some things from him. Patriots aren't as good in that division anymore either. Bills are kind of up and down. We don't really know what they're doing. They're releasing a lot of guys. Dolphins, when it gets cold out, it gets a little bit rough for them. We don't know Tua's health as well either. So I think Gardner Minshew with the Jets, he should seriously consider them as well. And if he doesn't consider the Colts or the Jets and the Steelers strike out on a few other players, as I've mentioned, with basically every single team that or player I've listed off has basically been with the Steelers. If they just strike out on all those guys, Gardner Minshew could go start with Pittsburgh and win you some games there too as well. They have a great defense. He wouldn't have to do anything super crazy or carry the load for the team as well. So those are the best fits, I feel like, for the quarterbacks for this free agency period. We'll have to see what happens. But we'll probably get into some wide receivers, tight ends, or some running backs even. A lot of good running backs here in the next few shows. So stay tuned. NFL free agency. It's upon us.